The kids who grew up as content are growing up, and they're talking. Welcome back to another Explainer. Today, we're unpacking a topic that touches, well, pretty much anyone who logs onto the internet. We're looking at this fascinating, newly emerging concept of the digital footprint that today's youth are inheriting. Now, for the entirety of human history, an inheritance was always something physical or financial, right? A family heirloom, a piece of land, maybe a savings account. But today, a whole generation is receiving a totally different kind of inheritance. They're inheriting a vast, permanent, and entirely public digital history of their own childhoods. We're going to look at the data, the source material, and the real-world impact of a cultural phenomenon that has quietly just taken over our feeds over the last decade. It's a pretty wild story of good intentions, the evolution of social media, and a rapidly approaching cultural reckoning.
Just let that sink in for a moment. We are literally looking at a generation raised on their parents' public feeds. Every tantrum, every bath time, every first step, it was all meticulously documented. But here's the massive shift we're witnessing right now. Those children, the actual stars of all that content, well, they're no longer toddlers. They're teenagers and young adults now. They're old enough to have opinions about their digital footprint. And trust me, they are starting to voice those opinions loudly. We're essentially witnessing the reckoning of a generation raised online. Okay, let's dive into this. Part 1, the age of sharenting. To truly understand where we're going with this, we first have to understand exactly how we got here. We really need to step back into the highly relatable past and look at this from the perspective of the parents who were the ones behind the camera. Imagine this scenario, right? A well-meaning parent is holding their phone, watching their toddler have an absolute meltdown over something completely irrational, like, having their sandwich cut into squares instead of triangles. The parent hits record. Why? Well, because parenting is incredibly hard. It can be super isolating, and there's a very natural urge to share these struggles with the community. They just want to say, hey, look, I'm surviving this today. Is anyone else dealing with this? But in that brief pause before tapping post, a crucial threshold gets crossed. And it's important to remember this isn't about malice. It's about a deeply relatable desire for connection and validation when you're deep in the messy trenches of raising a kid.
So what exactly is this phenomenon? Sharenting is the practice of parents heavily documenting and sharing their children's lives, milestones, and daily routines on public social media feeds. Notice the keywords in there: heavily documenting and public feeds. We aren't just talking about mailing a physical photo to grandma once a year for the holidays. No, we're talking about a steady, broadcasted stream of a child's most intimate, vulnerable, and formative moments, pushed out to an audience that extends way, way beyond close family and friends.
Let's move to and see how this builds, because this escalation definitely didn't happen overnight. Years ago, it started out with just the occasional funny meltdown video. It was sporadic, right? But then, as social media platforms evolved and really started rewarding frequent posting, we moved into these inch-stone celebrations. Suddenly, it wasn't just major milestones like walking or talking anymore. Every minor detail of the child's life became a highly curated event to be shared. And finally, that brings us to the present. Daily vlogs of kids' lives. Innocent sharing slowly, almost invisibly, normalized into constant, relentless documentation. The camera is just always on. Which brings us to part 2, the kids speak out. We're now experiencing this really jarring perspective shift. We're moving the lens away from the parents standing behind the camera, and we're handing the microphones straight to the now grown child, who was basically forced to live in front of it. And the search trend data for the term sharenting reveals a massive, absolutely undeniable spike in public interest lately. Now, what's really fascinating about this is that it proves this isn't just some niche internet debate happening in isolated comment sections. Not at all. This is a huge, quantifiable cultural reckoning. The data shows us that society at large is waking up to this issue, largely because the subjects of the content are finally old enough to search for it, question it, and challenge it themselves. So, what are these now-grown sharenting kids actually saying about all this? Well, the source material outlines their perspectives very clearly, and it's pretty heavy. First, many of them express being deeply uncomfortable with the sheer amount of content that exists of them. Second, there's a profound anger regarding the lack of consent. I mean, an infant cannot agree to have their bath time broadcasted to thousands of strangers. Third, they report feeling incredibly exposed publicly. Their most embarrassing or vulnerable moments are just out there forever. And finally, some even express feeling genuinely exploited by these videos. It's a really sobering reality check when we objectively look at how a digital footprint, one created entirely by someone else, actually impacts a person's autonomy and emotional well-being down the line.
But here is a very important and honestly, a very hopeful realization. Parents are actually starting to listen. The pushback from these grown kids is not falling on deaf ears. It's actually beginning to cause a real, tangible shift in parental behavior and awareness out there. Parents who started sharing with completely innocent intentions are hearing these first-hand accounts. They're looking at their own camera rolls, and they're reconsidering their posting habits. The dialogue is open now, and it is actively changing the culture of parenting online.
Okay, let's pivot and look at part 3, children as brand assets.
To fully understand the depth of this issue, we really have to look at the marketing and financial mechanics driving it behind the scenes. Let's walk through the monetization pipeline step by step to see how everyday childhood moments actually transform into lucrative assets. Step 1. The parent posts relatable mom content. Maybe it's a messy kitchen or a funny story about toddler logic. It builds an audience. Step 2. That audience size grows, allowing the creator to secure brand deals and sponsorships. Companies are literally paying for access to those viewers. Then, step 3, this is where it gets super complex. The content creator begins to monetize the child's milestones directly. A first birthday party suddenly becomes sponsored by a toy company. A back-to-school video is underwritten by a clothing brand. The child's actual lived experience becomes the unpaid brand asset driving the family business.
So the crucial point becomes glaringly clear when we compare adult influencers against child influencers. When an adult engages in content creation, there is clear, informed consent, and their earnings are legally protected because they're managing their own business, right? But contrast that with the child influencer. Here we have a massive disparity. There's an absolute inability for an infant or young child to provide legal consent to be the face of a marketing campaign. Furthermore, the source material highlights the massive legal gaps around child influencer earnings. Unlike traditional child actors in Hollywood, there are very, very few legal frameworks ensuring that the money generated by the child's image actually goes back to the child.
Which leads us to our final section, part 4. Privacy is the new luxury. As we digest the emotional realities of these kids speaking out and the structural realities of the monetization pipeline, what do all these revelations actually mean for the future of our digital culture? I want to leave you with a really powerful thought today. Privacy is becoming the new luxury. So what does that mean for a generation raised entirely in public? As we move forward, a childhood completely free from digital documentation might actually become a rare privilege. Will the kids of tomorrow look back and envy those whose awkward phases, tantrums, and milestones were allowed to simply fade into memory, rather than living forever on a server somewhere? The reckoning of sharenting really forces us to ask ourselves what we value more: the immediate validation of an online audience, or the long-term autonomy and privacy of the children we love. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer. Keep asking questions, keep thinking critically about the media you consume and create, and I'll catch you next time.